I didn't know I was under attack until I saw the red dot on my chest. I was standing in my backyard, spatula in one hand, a cold lager in the other, staring lovingly at a ribeye that was currently sizzling its way to a perfect medium rare. It was Saturday. The birds were singing. The charcoal was smoking. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I felt a sense of suburban nirvana. Then, the dot appeared. It hovered right over my heart, vivid and trembling. My first thought, naturally, was sniper. I froze. Had I forgotten to pay a parking ticket? Was this finally the consequences of pirating Game of Thrones 6 years ago? I slowly traced the trajectory of the laser beam across the yard, past my hydrangeas, over the top of the cedar fence, and right into the squinting right eye of Brenda. Brenda, the woman who once called the police because my recycling bin was aggressively blue. She was perched on a step stool on her side of the property line, wielding a construction-grade laser level like it was a Glock 19. She didn't look happy. Then again, Brenda never looked happy. She possessed a resting face that suggested she was constantly smelling spoiled milk. "Afternoon, Brenda," I called out, flipping the steak. "You targeting me for a drone strike? Or are we just playing tag?" She didn't lower the laser. "It's listing, Jack." "I'm listing?" I checked my stance. "I've only had one beer." "The fence!" she shrieked. Her voice was a sonic weapon, the kind of frequency that made dogs 3 streets over start howling. "Your fence is listing. I've been tracking it for 3 weeks. It has shifted 2.5 degrees to the left. It's encroaching on my visual harmony." I stared at the fence. It was a standard 6-foot cedar privacy fence. It looked like a fence. It acted like a fence. It kept my dog in, and Brenda out, mostly. "Brenda," I said, walking over to the property line, the laser dot dancing on my forehead now. "It's wood. It's rained for 3 days straight. Wood swells. It breathes. It's organic. Unlike, say, your personality." She slapped a clipboard down on the top post. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Save the sass for the code enforcement officer, Jack," she snapped. "I've already called them. And the HOA, and my brother-in-law who is a structural engineer, although he's currently unlicensed." She pointed a manicured finger at me. "That fence is an eyesore. It creates a chaotic horizon line. It lowers my property value. When I look out my kitchen window, I expect geometrical perfection, not this slouching disgrace." I looked at the clipboard. It was a citation. A real one. Violation. Structural integrity and aesthetic conformity. Non-perpendicular installation. "You called the city?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "On a Saturday?" "I want it down," she hissed, leaning in close enough that I could smell her peppermint tea and judgment. "And when you replace it, I want something that reflects the quality of this neighborhood. Something that speaks to order. Something that shines." She retracted the tape measure attached to her belt with a sharp snap, climbed down from her stool, and disappeared behind her perfectly manicured, soulless hedge. I stood there for a long time, the steak overcooked, the charcoal burned out. "Something that shines," she said. I looked at the crooked wooden post. I looked at the citation. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Okay, Brenda," I whispered to the empty yard. "You want shine? I'll give you the sun." The problem with bureaucracy is that it is written by people who assume everyone else is tired. They assume you will read the first paragraph, sigh, and give up. They did not account for me. I am a man with a mild case of insomnia, a high-speed internet connection, and a spite reservoir that runs deeper than the Mariana Trench. I spent the next 48 hours in my basement, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and printed pages of the city municipal code and the HOA bylaws. I felt like a detective in a noir film, hunting for the killer, except the killer was a loophole. "Honey," my wife, Sarah, called down from the top of the stairs. "You haven't showered in 2 days. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay, Sarah," I shouted back, highlighting a paragraph with such force the marker tip snapped. "I found it. Section 420.b. She walked down, holding a cup of coffee. She looked at the wall where I had taped up sketches of fence designs. "Jack, just fix the wood. It'll cost $500. "It's not about the money," I said, standing up. My knees popped. "It's about sending a message." I grabbed the binder and read aloud, pacing the room like a lawyer in a Grisham novel. Fencing materials must be solid, non-climbable, and maintain a height between 6 and 8 feet. Acceptable materials include wood, vinyl, masonry, and composite materials. Materials must be weather-resistant and maintained in good repair. I looked at her. "Do you see what's missing?" Sarah squinted. "No? Exclusions!" I slammed the binder shut. "It lists examples of acceptable materials. It does not provide an exhaustive list of forbidden materials. It doesn't say no glass. It doesn't say no refractive surfaces. It just says solid and non-climbable." "Jack," Sarah said, a note of warning in her voice. "What are you going to do?" "Brenda wants visual harmony," I said, grabbing my phone. "She wants something that shines. I'm going to build a fence that is technically a wall, legally a barrier, and spiritually a weapon of mass destruction." I started dialing contractors. The first 3 hung up on me. "You want a what?" the first guy asked. "Glass? Like a window?" "No, like a cathedral," I explained. "But thicker, industrial grade, stained." Click. The second guy laughed for 30 seconds straight and then asked if I was high. The third guy told me it was physically impossible and that the wind load would turn my backyard into a shrapnel grenade. Then I found Sully. Sully pulled up to my house in a Ford F-150 that sounded like it was gargling gravel. The truck was a patchwork of rust and Bondo, and the bumper sticker on the back read, "I don't brake for inspectors." He stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, wearing Carhartt overalls that had seen more war than peace. He had a beard that could hide a small badger. He didn't shake my hand. He just nodded at the house and spat a stream of tobacco juice into my azaleas. I decided to forgive him. "You the guy with the glass fetish?" Sully grunted. "I prefer to think of it as an appreciation for light dynamics," I said. "Come round back." We stood at the property line. Brenda was watching from her kitchen window. I could see the blinds twitch. "So," Sully said, kicking the rotting cedar post, "you want to replace this wood with stained glass. 8 feet high, 50 feet long." "Tempered," I added. "Reinforced, steel framing. It needs to be code compliant. Solid, unclimbable." Sully scratched his beard. It made a sound like sandpaper on rough wood. "You know how much custom-cut, tempered, leaded glass costs per square foot?" "I have savings," I said, "and a credit card with a limit that I am willing to test." "Wind load is gonna be a bitch," Sully mused, looking at the sky. "We'd need to sink steel I-beams into concrete footings, 4 feet deep, weld a grid, slot the glass in with silicone gaskets. Basically, you're building a skyscraper wall, but short." "Can you do it?" Sully looked at Brenda's house. He looked at the laser-straight line of her manicured lawn. He looked back at me. A glint of understanding appeared in his eyes. He was a contractor. He had dealt with Karens. He knew the pain. "I usually do decks," Sully said. "But I hate homeowners associations. They made me take down my flagpole in '98. I never forgot." "Is that a yes?" "It's going to cost you the price of a Honda Civic," Sully said. "And I want cash for the materials up front. And beer, good beer. None of that light crap." "Deal," I said. "Can we start Sunday at 7:00 a.m.? Sully grinned. It was a terrifying sight. "Buddy, for this, I'll bring the jackhammer." The demolition was efficient, violent, and loud. Sully brought 2 guys with him, Big Mike and Little Mike. Ironically, Little Mike was larger, but Big Mike had a bigger aura of menace. They attacked the old wooden fence with sledgehammers like it owed them money. Wham, crack, splinter. Brenda was outside in 3 minutes flat. She was wearing a silk bathrobe and wielding her phone like a shield. "What is this?" she screamed over the sound of a reciprocating saw. "It's 7:05 on a Sunday." "Maintenance," I yelled back, holding a coffee mug. "You said it was structurally unsound, Brenda. We're mitigating the hazard." "You don't have a permit for this level of noise." I pointed to the piece of paper I had taped to the back of my shirt. "City ordinance allows construction between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. on weekends. Read my back." She stormed off to call the police. Officer Miller arrived 20 minutes later. He looked like a man who had been hoping for a quiet shift involving a donut and maybe a nap in his cruiser. Instead, he walked into a construction zone that smelled of sawdust and spite. "Sir," Miller said, adjusting his belt. "Ideally, we don't run jackhammers before folks have had their coffee." "Officer," I said, putting on my best innocent face. "My neighbor cited me for a dangerous fence. I am simply complying with her demand for immediate rectification. If I stop now, I leave a gaping hole in the security of the neighborhood. What if a stray dog gets in? What if a child wanders through?" Miller looked at Sully, who was currently ripping a post out of the ground with his bare hands. "Is that a permit?" Miller asked, pointing to the document I handed him. "Stamped by Gladys at the city clerk's office yesterday," I said. "Permit for non-traditional perimeter barrier replacement." Miller squinted at the permit. "It says here material type is silica-based amorphous solid composite?" "Fancy word for glass," I said. "Glass?" Miller looked up. "You're building a glass fence?" "Art," I corrected. "It's an installation." Miller sighed. He looked at Brenda's window, where she was filming us. He looked at me. He looked at Sully. "Just try to keep the screaming to a minimum," Miller said. He walked away. "You heard the man," Sully shouted to the mics. "Less screaming, more drilling." The real battle, however, was the design. I didn't want pretty glass. I didn't want peaceful blues and calming greens. I wanted aggressive colors. I went to the glass supplier with a very specific palette in mind. "I want Amber Alert orange," I told the supplier, "and radioactive red, and maybe some bile yellow." "You making a warning sign?" the supplier asked. "I'm making a statement," I said. We designed a pattern. It was abstract, technically. Modern art. Lots of sharp angles and swirling vortexes. But if you stood at a certain angle, and if you had a dirty mind, the central yellow swirl looked suspiciously like a hand extending a middle finger. It was subtle. Plausible deniability was key. The steel beams went in. The concrete was poured. The frame rose up like the skeleton of a beast. Brenda watched it all. She didn't know what it was yet. She just saw steel. "It looks like a prison yard," she shouted over the fence on Tuesday. "Industrial chic is very in right now, Brenda," I replied. Then the crates arrived. Installation day was tense. The panels were heavy. Sully was sweating. Big Mike almost dropped a sheet of crimson-red glass that cost more than my first car. But piece by piece, it came together. It wasn't transparent. It was textured, rippled, and thick. You couldn't see through it, which satisfied the privacy requirement. But light? Light could get through. Oh, could it ever? We finished at 3:00 p.m. on a Friday. The sun was beginning its descent into the west. My house faces east. Brenda's house faces west. This was the physics of my revenge. For years, Brenda had complained about my trees blocking her light. Well, the trees were trimmed. The wood was gone. Now there was only the wall. I set up 2 lawn chairs in the middle of my yard. I handed a beer to Sully. "You think it's gonna work?" Sully asked, wiping grease on his overalls. "It's a south-facing angle with a western exposure deviation," I said, checking my watch. "The sun hits the incident angle in 4 minutes." We waited. The sun dipped lower. The first ray hit the top panel, a slab of deep, violent magenta. A beam of light, concentrated by the rippled texture of the glass, shot across Brenda's yard like a laser blast from the Death Star. It hit her pristine white siding and turned it a bruised purple. "Nice," Sully grunted. Then the sun dropped into the kill zone. The entire fence lit up. It was glorious. It was a wall of fire. The reds, the oranges, the yellows. They caught the sunlight and amplified it. Because of the texture I had chosen, cathedral hammered, the light didn't just pass through. It scattered. It projected. We watched as a kaleidoscope of psychedelic terror blasted into Brenda's kitchen window. I could see it happening through her own glass. Her white cabinets turned blood red. Her stainless steel fridge gleamed with a sickly neon green. The entire back of her house looked like it was being abducted by aliens who were into disco. And the heat! I hadn't fully calculated the thermal gain, but standing near the fence felt like opening an oven door. Suddenly, the back door of Brenda's house flew open. She stumbled out, clutching her eyes. "My eyes!" she screamed. "It's burning!" She looked at her patio furniture. Her beige cushions were currently glowing with a pattern that looked like a demon vomiting lava. "What have you done?" she shrieked, shading her face with her hand. "My kitchen is red. Everything is red." I took a sip of beer. "It's the golden hour, Brenda. I thought you wanted something that shines." "This isn't a fence," she yelled. It's a solar flare." "It's abstract modernism," I called back. "You said you wanted to raise the property values. I've turned your kitchen into a James Turrell exhibit. You should thank me." "I'm calling the police," she screamed, retreating inside as a beam of concentrated yellow light hit her in the face. "She's gonna sue you," Sully said, cracking a smile. "Let her try," I said. I followed the code. The summons to the HOA hearing arrived via certified mail. The envelope was heavy. It felt like it contained a declaration of war. Agenda Item 1, the glass monstrosity at 42 Maple Lane. The meeting was held in the community center basement, a room that smelled of floor wax and despair. The entire board was there. 5 retirees who ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist and a gavel made of mahogany. Brenda was there too. She had prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I wore my best suit. Sully came with me. I made him wear a blazer over a clean t-shirt. He looked like a bouncer for a library. Mr. Thompson, the HOA president, a man named Mr. Henderson who was 104 years old, wheezed. We are here to discuss the structure you have erected. Brenda stood up. She was vibrating with rage. It's a hazard, she shouted, clicking a remote. A photo appeared on the projector screen. It was her living room, bathed in a hellish red glow. This is my breakfast nook at 5 p.m. I can't eat. My cat is traumatized. It chases the light spots and runs into walls. Click. Another photo. The view from the street. The fence glowed like a radioactive isotope. It generates heat, Brenda continued. My begonias have been scorched. It's an environmental disaster. Mr. Henderson looked at me over his spectacles. Mr. Thompson, explain yourself. I stood up. I walked to the front. I placed a thick binder on the table. Distinguished members of the board, I began. When my neighbor, the lovely Brenda, informed me that my previous fence was aesthetically displeasing and structurally unsound, I took her criticism to heart. I sought to beautify our community. By building a disco wall? Brenda snapped. By installing a high-value art installation, I corrected. I motioned to Sully. Allow me to introduce my consultant, Mr. Sullivan. He is a specialist in avant-garde architectural boundaries. Sully cleared his throat. Yeah, it's art. Worth about 40 grand. The board gasped. $40,000? Mr. Henderson asked. Materials and labor, I said. Now I have reviewed the bylaws extensively. Section 8, paragraph 3. Fences must be maintained and attractive. I submit to you that stained glass is objectively attractive. It is found in churches. Are you saying churches are ugly, Brenda? I'm saying my kitchen looks like a crime scene, Brenda yelled. Furthermore, I pressed on, opening the binder, here is the city code. Here is the permit. Here is the wind load certification. Everything is legal. If you force me to take it down, you are ordering the destruction of a $40,000 asset. I will be forced to sue the HOA for damages, plus legal fees, plus emotional distress caused by the suppression of my artistic expression. The room went silent. The board members looked at each other. They looked at the HOA budget, which was currently struggling to pay for mulch. They looked at me. They looked at Brenda. They didn't care about aesthetics. They cared about their bank accounts. Mr. Henderson sighed. He banged the gavel. The board finds that, while the fence is unconventional, it does not strictly violate the current bylaws as written. Brenda let out a sound like a deflating tire. However, Henderson yelled, pointing the gavel at me, we are immediately passing a new bylaw, effective tomorrow morning, banning all glass, acrylic, and light-refracting fencing materials in the subdivision. Understood, I said, smiling. But since mine is already built— Grandfathered, Henderson grunted. It stays. Case closed. Get out. Brenda looked at me. If eyes could kill, I would have been vaporized on the spot. This isn't over, Jack, she whispered. Buy some curtains, Brenda, I said. Thick ones. Life settled into a new rhythm after the Great Glass War. Brenda did, in fact, buy curtains. Blackout curtains, industrial grade. She keeps them drawn from 3 p.m. until sunset, every single day. Her house looks like a bunker. The fence became famous. Teenagers started coming by to take selfies in front of it during the golden hour. Someone tagged it on Google Maps as the psychedelic wall of spite. I have a 4.8 star rating. Officer Miller drives by occasionally. He usually slows down, shakes his head, and gives me a thumbs up. As for Sully, he's coming back next week. I was grilling Outback yesterday, enjoying the way the red glass cast a warm, demonic glow over my hamburgers, when I noticed something. Brenda's driveway. It's cracked. I walked over to the property line. Brenda was outside, squinting in the shade of her porch. "Afternoon, Brenda," I called out. She didn't answer. "You know," I said, leaning against my beautiful, invincible glass wall. "I was reading the city code the other day. Did you know there's a regulation about driveway maintenance? Section 502.c. Paved surfaces must be free of fissures exceeding 1 inch in width." Brenda stiffened. "I'd hate for someone to trip," I said, taking a bite of my burger. "You really should look into that. Visual harmony and all." She went inside and slammed the door. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sully. "Yo," he answered. "Sully," I said, "how much do you know about glow-in-the-dark driveway pavers?" There was a long silence on the other end, then a deep, gravelly chuckle. "I'll bring the mixer," Sully said. I hung up, took a sip of my beer, and watched the sun set through the glass. The world was red and orange and chaotic. It was perfect. The thing about revenge is that it's an addiction. You start with offense, you win, and you get a hit of dopamine so potent it could wake the dead. But then the high fades, and you find yourself looking at your neighbor's cracked asphalt at 2:00 a.m., wondering if you can make it visible from the International Space Station. Sully arrived 2 days later. This time, he wasn't in the truck. He was in a van that looked like it had been used for bank robberies in the 1980s. "I did some digging," Sully said, kicking my front tire as a greeting. He handed me a plastic bag filled with a grayish powder. "Is this illegal, Sully?" I asked, holding the bag up to the light. "It's strontium aluminate," he grunted. "High grade. The stuff they use for emergency exit signs on oil rigs. It charges in UV light. Glows for 12 hours. I got a buddy in industrial supply who owes me a favor." "How bright?" Sully smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just discovered fire. "We're talking radioactive spill bright, Jack. We're talking confuse the local moth population bright." I looked over at Brenda's house. Her blackout curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon sun, which was currently being refracted through my fence into a nice shade of blood orange on her siding. "The code says I have to repair the driveway," I said, reciting my research. "It says the material must be paved, durable, and of a uniform consistency. It does not specify color. It does not specify luminescence." "I did the math," Sully said, pulling a crumpled napkin out of his pocket. "If we mix this powder into a clear coat sealant and apply it over fresh white concrete, it'll charge all day. When the sun goes down..." "My driveway becomes a runway," I finished. "Better," Sully said. "It becomes a ghost." We shook hands. The pact was sealed. We decided to pour at night. Ostensibly, this was to avoid the heat of the day affecting the cure rate of the concrete. In reality, it was because Brenda went to bed at 8:30 p.m. after watching Wheel of Fortune, and I didn't want her asking why the wet concrete looked slightly vibrating. Sully brought the mics back. Big Mike was holding a flashlight. Little Mike was operating the mixer. "Keep it quiet," I whispered. "If she wakes up, she'll call the cops about the noise ordinance." "Concrete don't make noise, boss," Big Mike whispered back, creating a sound similar to a bear stepping on dry leaves. The pour went smoothly until about 11:00 p.m. We were smoothing the surface, floating the wet cement into a perfect flat ribbon from the street to my garage. That's when Officer Miller rolled by. He slowed his cruiser to a crawl. He rolled down the window. He looked at the 3 men standing in wet concrete at midnight. "Jack," Miller said, sounding incredibly weary. "Officer Miller," I said, leaning on a trowel. "Just doing some essential repairs. Trip hazard, you know, liability." Miller shined his spotlight on the wet concrete. Because we had already mixed in the strontium powder, the spotlight hit the cement and stayed there. The driveway seemed to drink the light. It glowed back a faint, eerie green, even after he moved the beam. "Is that—" Miller squinted. "Is that glowing?" "Reflective additives," I lied. "For safety. So the Uber Eats drivers don't miss the house." Miller looked at Brenda's dark house. He looked at my fence, which was currently dark, but looming like a stained glass monolith. "You know," Miller said, "technically there's no law against a driveway being visible. But if I get a call that a UFO has landed, I'm coming back." "Understood, officer." He drove off. "He knows," Sully said, smoothing a corner. "He doesn't care," I replied. "Pour the sealant." The next day was sunny, scorching hot. The UV index was an 11. My new white driveway sat there, soaking it all in. It looked innocent. It looked like a pristine strip of vanilla icing. Brenda came out to get her mail at noon. She glared at the fresh concrete. "It's too white, Jack," she yelled. "It's blinding." "It's clean, Brenda," I yelled back. "It symbolizes purity." She huffed and went back inside. Little did she know, she was charging the battery. Sunset came at 8:14 p.m. Sully and I were on the roof of my house. We had lawn chairs and a cooler. "Here it comes," Sully whispered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the streetlights flickered on. But my driveway didn't need streetlights. As the ambient light faded, the driveway began to wake up. It started as a soft, ethereal blue-green glow. Then, as true darkness fell, it intensified. It wasn't just glowing. It was emitting. It cast shadows on the trees. It illuminated the underside of my car. It looked like the landing strip for a cyberpunk nightclub. The glow was so intense that it reflected off the side of Brenda's house. Her bedroom window, which faced my driveway, was suddenly bathed in a cold, ghostly aquamarine light. "It looks like nuclear waste," Sully said, awestruck. "It's beautiful." "It's brighter than I thought," I admitted. "I can read my watch by it." Suddenly, Brenda's bedroom window flew open. "What is that?" she screamed into the night. "Why is the ground glowing?" "Safety features, Brenda," I called down from the roof. "Passive solar lighting, it's very eco-friendly." "It looks like Chernobyl," she shrieked. "I can't sleep. It's like sleeping inside an aquarium." "Try a sleep mask," I suggested. She slammed the window. I turned to Sully. "She's going to call the EPA." "Let her," Sully said, cracking a beer. "It's non-toxic. I checked the MSDS sheet. It's just rock dust." We hadn't calculated for the wildlife. This was a tactical error. By 10:00 p.m., the driveway was the brightest light source within 3 miles. Every moth, beetle, and night-flying insect in the county decided that my driveway was the promised land. It started as a swarm. Then it became a cloud. Thousands of moths descended on the glowing concrete. They fluttered in the green light, creating a writhing, chaotic shadow play on Brenda's wall. "That's a lot of bugs," Sully noted. "It adds movement to the piece," I said, though I was slightly concerned. Then the bats came, to eat the moths. And then the owls came, to eat mostly to screech at the bats. By midnight, my driveway was a thriving, violent ecosystem. The noise was incredible. Screeching, fluttering, buzzing. Brenda came out onto her porch in her robe, wielding a broom. There are bats! She screamed, swatting at the air. You've summoned a plague! You are the Antichrist of the HOA! It's nature, Brenda, I yelled, dodging a confused June bug. I'm supporting local biodiversity. She retreated inside, but I saw the flash of a camera. She was documenting the fauna. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not from the HOA. From Brenda. It was a handwritten note, slipped into my mailbox. Dear Jack, since you enjoy sensory experiences so much, I thought I would contribute to the neighborhood's ambiance. If you like light, surely you must love sound. Sincerely, Brenda. I didn't know what she meant until the wind picked up that afternoon. It started as a gentle tinkling, then a clatter, then a cacophony. I walked into the backyard. Brenda had hung wind chimes. Not 5 wind chimes, not 10. She had hung hundreds. Every branch of her oak tree, every inch of her gutter, every post of her patio was draped in wind chimes. And not the nice melodic bamboo ones. These were cheap metal chimes, the kind that sounded like a silverware drawer being thrown down a flight of stairs. There were massive pipe chimes that gonged like a funeral bell. There were tiny glass ones that shattered the nerves. The wind blew. The noise was deafening. It was a discordant symphony of metallic hate. Clang, tink, bong, crash, shimmer. Clang. I stood there, my ears ringing. She was on her porch, wearing industrial ear defenders, sipping tea. She saw me. She raised her mug in a toast. She had weaponized the wind. I went inside. I couldn't hear the TV. I couldn't hear myself think. The glowing driveway and the stained glass fence were visual assaults. But this was psychological warfare. I called Sully. What? He yelled into the phone. I said she bought wind chimes, I screamed. I can't hear you, Jack. It sounds like you're in a factory. Come over. Bring the big ladder. If Brenda wanted to play with air, I would play with air. Sully arrived and looked at the chimes with professional disdain. That's a lot of aluminum, he said. It's aggressive. How do we stop it? I asked. I can't steal them. That's theft. We need to disrupt the airflow, Sully said. Or we overpower it. Overpower it? Sully grinned. Ever heard of a vortex cannon? We spent the weekend in the garage. We built a device. It wasn't a weapon, strictly speaking. It was an air displacement unit. It was essentially a trash can with a rubber membrane on the back and a focused cone on the front. When you thumped the membrane, it fired a slug of compressed air that could knock a hat off a man at 50 feet. We built a motorized version. Automatic fire. We mounted it on my roof, aimed directly at her oak tree. Is this legal? I asked, looking at the contraption. There's no projectile, Sully said. It's just air. You can't outlaw air, Jack. We waited for the next windy day. The chimes started their infernal racket. Clang, bong, tink. Fire, I said. Sully hit the switch. Thump, 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 thump. Invisible rings of air shot across the property line. They hit the wind chimes. But instead of silencing them, the air slugs sent the chimes swinging wildly, tangling them together. The chimes wrapped around each other. The strings knotted. The metal tubes bashed together, and then silence. We had created a knot so complex Alexander the Great couldn't have cut it. The chimes were now just a tangled ball of metal junk hanging from the tree. Brenda ran out. She looked at her silent, knotted chimes. She looked up at my roof, where the air cannon was puffing out gentle smoke rings. My chimes, she wailed. They're ruined. Turbulence is a real problem in this area, Brenda, I shouted. Climate change. The war had reached a stalemate. I had the fence of blinding light. She had the blackout curtains. I had the driveway of radioactive glow. She had she had a lot of tangled metal in her tree. We were exhausted. My electric bill was high, from the air compressor. Her blood pressure was higher. One evening, Officer Miller pulled up. He got out of his car, walked up my glowing driveway, and knocked on my door. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked determined. "Jack," he said, "come with me." He marched me to the property line. He then walked over and banged on Brenda's door. She came out, looking suspicious. "Brenda, Jack," Miller said, "I have calculated the number of man-hours the police department has spent on this block in the last 6 months. It is higher than the hours we spent on the downtown riots." He pulled out a piece of paper. "This," Miller said, "is a peace treaty." "I'm listening," I said. "Jack," Miller said, "you will install a dimmer switch on the driveway lighting, or you will paint over it." "I can't dim concrete," I said. "Then you will buy Brenda high-grade sleep masks, the silk ones." I grumbled. "Fine." "And Brenda," Miller turned to her, "you will take down the chimes, all of them, and you will stop measuring Jack's grass with a ruler." "But he—" Brenda started. Miller held up a finger. "If I get one more call about light, sound, fences, or driveways, I am going to find a code violation on both your houses. I will find something. I will measure your gutter height. I will check your water pressure. I will audit your recycling. Do you understand?" We looked at Miller. He was bluffing. Probably. But he had the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Fine," Brenda said. "Fine," I said. Miller got back in his car and drove away. I looked at Brenda. She looked at me. She looked at the stained glass fence, glowing softly in the twilight. "The red panel," she said, pointing to the one that blasted her kitchen. "It's vivid." "It's radioactive red," I said. "I thought it had pop." "It's terrible," she said, "but there was no heat in it." "Your chimes were robust," I admitted. "I have tinnitus." "Good," she said. She turned to go inside. She stopped at the door. "Jack?" "Yeah, Brenda." "The driveway," she said. "It really does keep the moths away from my porch light. They all go to your side." "You're welcome," I said. She went inside. I stood there on my glowing green runway next to my cathedral of spite. I took a sip of my beer. The war was over. For now. But as I looked at my roof, I noticed the shingles were looking a little dull. I wondered if they made iridescent roofing tiles. I pulled out my phone. "Sully?" I asked. "You busy next week?"